Welcome to Ironwad Whispers, your corner for stories that hit the heart and spark the imagination. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? Share your city or country down in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you're ready for a journey filled with twists, turns, and emotions that'll keep you hooked till the very end, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. The Tiffany box sat perfectly centered on the Italian marble kitchen island, its signature blue radiating against the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Tribeca penthouse. Christopher Rothschild adjusted his silk tie one final time, checking his Patek Philippe watch, 7:42 a.m., exactly as planned. Today marked 10 years since he'd married Natasha, and the $2 million diamond necklace inside that box was merely the opening act of what he'd orchestrated for their anniversary celebration. At 45, Christopher had built Rothschild Capital from a small hedge fund into a financial empire worth $12 billion. He'd conquered markets, crushed competitors, and accumulated wealth that most could only dream of. But as he stood in his pristine kitchen, waiting for Natasha to discover his gift, he felt an unusual flutter of nervousness. Perhaps it was because lately she'd seemed distant, her smiles not quite reaching her eyes, her laughter a beat too late at dinner parties. He'd attributed it to stress from her charity work, but today would fix everything. Today would remind her why she'd fallen in love with him all those years ago. Natasha descended the floating staircase at 8 a.m. sharp, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, wearing the cream-colored Chanel suit he'd bought her in Paris last month. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent a decade in the spotlight as a billionaire's wife, but Christopher noticed her hand trembling slightly as it gripped the banister. "Good morning, darling," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar formal tone she'd adopted recently, as if they were business associates rather than spouses. "Happy anniversary, my love," Christopher said, gesturing toward the box with the satisfaction of a man who believed expensive jewelry could solve any marital discord. Natasha's face went pale when she saw it, not with the excitement he'd anticipated, but with something that looked almost like dread. She approached the box slowly, as if it might explode, and when she opened it to reveal the cascade of diamonds, 60 carats arranged in a pattern that had taken Harry Winston's best designers 6 months to perfect, she didn't gasp with delight. Instead, a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Christopher," she whispered, "we need to talk." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Christopher felt his stomach drop, recognizing the tone from countless business negotiations that were about to go sideways. "If this is about me working too much, I've already cleared my schedule for the next week," he said quickly, moving toward her. "The yacht is ready in the Hamptons, and I've booked that restaurant in Montauk you love." "I'm pregnant," Natasha interrupted, the words falling between them like shattered glass. For a moment, Christopher's world stopped, then reformed itself around this miraculous news. They'd been trying for 5 years, spent hundreds of thousands on fertility treatments, consulted the best specialists in the world. That's wonderful," he exclaimed, reaching for her, but she stepped back, clutching the jewelry box like a shield. "Natasha, this is the best anniversary gift you could have given me. We're finally going to have our family." Natasha's tears were flowing freely now, and she set the necklace down with shaking hands. "Christopher, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice breaking. "The baby, I'm 3 months along." Christopher's mind began calculating even as his heart started to race. 3 months ago, he'd been in Tokyo for 2 weeks, closing the biggest deal of his career. 3 months ago, Natasha had said she needed space, had gone to stay at their house in the Hamptons. 3 months ago, his best friend Daniel had offered to check on her, to make sure she was okay. "No," Christopher said, the word coming out as barely a whisper. "No. You're confused about the dates. The doctors said the treatments were working. This is our miracle, Natasha. This is what we've been waiting for." But even as he spoke, he was remembering things. Daniel's sudden business trips that coincided with his own travel schedule. Natasha's insistence on attending Daniel's charity galas, even when Christopher couldn't make it. The way she'd started putting her phone face down during dinner. At this moment of devastating revelation, what would you do if you were Christopher? Would you demand immediate answers, walk away in silence, or try to salvage what's left? Share your thoughts below on how you'd handle discovering such a betrayal. The penthouse's smart home system announced an arrival at the private elevator, and Christopher's blood turned to ice when he heard the voice on the intercom. "It's Daniel. I know you're both up there. We need to handle this like adults." Natasha's face crumbled completely, and she reached for Christopher's hand, but he jerked away as if her touch would burn him. "You called him?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "You told him first?" "He deserved to know," Natasha said, and those 3 words destroyed what was left of Christopher's world. He stood frozen as the elevator ascended, carrying his best friend since college, his best man at their wedding, his business partner in 3 major deals, the godfather to his sister's children. The man who had apparently been sleeping with his wife while Christopher was building empires and buying diamonds. Daniel emerged from the elevator looking haggard, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his custom suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. "Chris," he began, but Christopher's fist connected with his jaw before another word could escape. Daniel stumbled backward, blood immediately flowing from his split lip, but he didn't fight back. "I deserve that," he said, spitting blood onto the pristine marble floor. "I deserve worse." "How long?" Christopher's voice was barely human, a growl from somewhere primal and wounded. "How long have you been fucking my wife?" Natasha gasped at the crude language. Christopher never spoke like that, prided himself on his sophistication, but Daniel met his eyes steadily. 4 months, he said. "It started when you were in Singapore. She was lonely. I was going through my divorce, and it just happened. Christopher laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the penthouse. 23 years of friendship, and it just happened. You were my brother, Daniel. I trusted you with everything. My business, my home, my wife." He turned to Natasha, who was sobbing quietly. "And you. I gave you everything. This penthouse, the houses, the cars, the jewelry. I worked 18-hour days to build this life for us." "That's exactly the problem," Natasha said, finding her voice through her tears. "You gave me things, Christopher. Beautiful, expensive things, but never yourself. Do you know when we last had a real conversation that wasn't about your deals or my charity events? Can you remember the last time you looked at me? Really looked at me, without checking your phone?" She gestured around the penthouse. "This isn't a home, it's a museum. And I'm just another acquisition you display at parties." Christopher wanted to argue, to point out the romantic dinners, the lavish vacations, the thoughtful gifts. But as he stood there, he realized he couldn't remember the last time they'd laughed together, couldn't recall when they'd last made love without him mentally reviewing market positions. "So you run to him?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You destroy our marriage for what? Attention?" "I fell in love," Natasha said simply, and those 3 words hit harder than any physical blow could have. "With Daniel, I'm not a trophy or an accessory. I'm a person. We talk about books, about dreams, about fears. He knows my middle name, Christopher. After 10 years of marriage, do you even know my middle name?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Christopher stood in his $12 million penthouse, surrounded by priceless art and bespoke furniture, and felt poorer than he'd ever been in his life. The diamond necklace sparkled on the counter, mocking him with its useless brilliance. All his wealth, all his success, and he couldn't even keep his wife from falling into his best friend's arms. "I want a divorce," Natasha said quietly. "Daniel and we want to raise this child together. We'll be fair about the settlement. You can tell people whatever you want about why we're separating. But this marriage has been over for years, Christopher. We've just been too afraid to admit it." Christopher looked between his wife and his best friend, these 2 people who had been the closest thing to family he'd allowed himself, and felt something inside him shatter. "Get out," he said, his voice barely audible. "Both of you. Take the necklace, Natasha. Consider it a parting gift for the baby. My lawyer will be in touch." He turned his back on them, staring out at the Manhattan skyline that had once made him feel like a king. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Christopher stood alone in his kingdom of glass and steel, wondering how a man could gain the entire world and lose everything that mattered. The anniversary gift sat abandoned on the counter, its diamonds catching the morning light like tears frozen in time. He picked up his phone. noted 17 missed calls from various business associates, and for the first time in his adult life, Christopher Rothschild turned it off. There would be time for revenge, for legal battles, for financial maneuvering. But right now, he needed to figure out how a man who could predict market movements with uncanny accuracy had been so blind to the collapse of his own life. The bourbon burned as it went down, but Christopher poured another anyway. It was 9:47 a.m. on his 10th wedding anniversary, and he was already drunk in his office, staring at a photograph from his wedding day. Daniel stood beside him as best man, grinning widely, while Natasha looked radiant in her Vera Wang gown. They all looked so young, so certain that wealth and success would insulate them from life's cruelties. His phone, despite being turned off, somehow rang. Christopher stared at it, wondering if the alcohol was playing tricks on him, before remembering the emergency override his sister had insisted on after his last health scare. "What?" he answered roughly. "Christopher, thank God." His sister Catherine's voice was breathless. "I just saw the news. Someone leaked the story. It's everywhere. Natasha, Daniel, the pregnancy. The stock price is already dropping." "How?" Christopher asked, though he wasn't really surprised. In their world, secrets were currency, and someone had just made a fortune selling his humiliation. "Does it matter?" Catherine responded. "The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're concerned about instability in leadership." "Christopher, you need to get ahead of this." "Let them meet," Christopher said, taking another swig of bourbon. "Let them all gossip and speculate and calculate how this affects their portfolios." "I don't care anymore, Catherine." There was silence on the other end, then his sister's voice, softer now. "Where are you?" "I'm coming over." Catherine arrived 30 minutes later, using her spare key to enter the penthouse. She found Christopher on the terrace, standing dangerously close to the edge, still holding the wedding photo. "Don't be dramatic," she said, pulling him back. "You're not the jumping type. You're too proud to give them that satisfaction." "Pride," Christopher laughed bitterly. "That's all I have left, isn't it? My pride and my money. Tell me, Catherine, when did I become this person? When did I become someone whose wife would rather have his best friend's child than his own?" Catherine took the bottle from his hand and set it aside. "When you decided that winning was more important than living," she said bluntly. "When you started measuring love in carats and square footage instead of moments and memories." Catherine's brutal honesty cut to the heart of Christopher's failure. "Do you believe success and ambition are incompatible with genuine love and connection? Can someone truly have it all? Or must we always sacrifice one for the other? Let us know your perspective in the comments." The truth of her words cut through his drunken haze. Christopher slumped onto a terrace chair, his head in his hands. "I gave her everything," he mumbled. "Everything I had." Catherine sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "No, Christopher. You gave her everything you could buy. There's a difference." As the sun climbed higher over Manhattan, casting shadows across the terrace, Christopher's phone buzzed with alerts. The financial press was having a field day. Billionaire's best friend betrayal. Rothschild's romance ruin. The $12 billion divorce. Each headline was another twist of the knife. But what hurt most was a single text from Daniel. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen this way. I loved you like a brother." "Loved," Christopher noted. Past tense. As if 23 years of friendship could be dismissed with a change in verb conjugation. He thought about all the times Daniel had been there. Through his father's death. Through the early struggles of building his company. Through his first heartbreak in business school. And all that time had Daniel been waiting, watching, planning. The doorbell rang, followed by persistent knocking. Catherine went to answer it, returning with Christopher's lawyer, Richard Steinberg, a man who'd handled divorces for half of Manhattan's elite. "We need to move fast," Richard said without preamble. "Natasha's already retained Melissa Crawford." Christopher recognized the name, the city's most ruthless divorce attorney, known for extracting maximum settlements from wealthy husbands. "She can have half," Christopher said wearily. "I don't care about the money." Richard's eyes widened. "Half? Christopher, we're talking about $6 billion. Plus, with the prenup." "The prenup has an infidelity clause," Christopher interrupted. "She cheated. She gets nothing beyond the basic settlement." "That's not entirely accurate," Richard said carefully. The clause specifies that infidelity voids the enhanced settlement provisions, but she's still entitled to marital assets acquired during the marriage. And there's the matter of the pregnancy. Family court judges tend to be very sympathetic to pregnant women, regardless of the circumstances. Christopher stood abruptly, swaying slightly. Then give her what she wants. I won't have my child, even if it's not biologically mine. Raised in poverty because of my wounded pride. Richard and Catherine exchanged glances. Christopher, Catherine said gently, the child isn't yours. You don't have any obligation. The child is innocent, Christopher cut her off. And for 10 years, Natasha was my wife. Whatever she's done, whatever pain she's caused, I won't be the kind of man who throws a pregnant woman into the street. He looked at Richard. Draw up a generous settlement. $3 billion, the Hamptons house, and a trust fund for the child. Richard's jaw dropped. That's unprecedented. Christopher, you're not thinking clearly. The alcohol, the shock. But Christopher was already walking away, heading for his home gym. If he was going to survive this, he needed to sweat out the bourbon and the bitterness. As he changed into workout clothes, he caught sight of himself in the mirror, 45 years old, still fit from daily training sessions, successful beyond most people's dreams, and utterly, completely alone. The news hit Wall Street like a tsunami. Rothschild Capital's stock price plummeted 12% in the first hour of trading, wiping out $2 billion in market value. Christopher watched from his treadmill, running at a punishing pace as if he could outrun the humiliation. The financial news channels were having a field day, with talking heads speculating about everything from his mental state to the company's stability. His phone rang constantly, board members, clients, reporters, but Christopher ignored them all. He ran until his legs burned, lifted weights until his muscles screamed, then collapsed on the gym floor, staring at the ceiling. This was supposed to be his perfect day, his perfect anniversary. Instead, it was the day his life imploded in the most public way possible. By noon, the paparazzi had surrounded his building. Catherine fielded calls while Richard worked on damage control, but Christopher remained in self-imposed isolation. He ordered the staff to leave, wanting to be alone with his misery. But as he stood in his empty penthouse, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of things that suddenly meant nothing, he realized that he'd been alone for years. Natasha had just made it official. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. The doorman called up, "Nervous, Mr. Rothschild. Your mother is here." Christopher hadn't seen Eleanor Rothschild in 6 months, their relationship strained by his father's death and the way Christopher had thrown himself into work afterward. She swept in wearing her signature St. John suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression unreadable. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Good. You should look terrible. Your wife is pregnant with another man's child, and that man is Daniel, whom I always said was too charming for his own good." She settled onto the sofa, as if she owned the place. "So what's your plan?" "My plan?" Christopher laughed hollowly. "My plan was to give Natasha a $2 million necklace and spend the week on our yacht." Plans change. Eleanor studied her son with sharp eyes. "I meant your plan for revenge. You're a Rothschild. We don't take betrayal lying down. There's no revenge, Mother. I'm giving Natasha a generous settlement and moving on." Eleanor's laugh was cold. "Moving on. You're falling apart. And Daniel, what about him? He's your business partner in 3 major deals. He has inside information about your entire operation. You think he won't use that against you?" Christopher hadn't considered that aspect, his personal pain overshadowing the practical implications. Daniel knew everything, every strategy, every weakness, every planned acquisition. "He wouldn't," Christopher said, but even he heard the uncertainty in his voice. "He already has," Eleanor said, pulling out her phone. "Whitmore Industries announced a bid for Techstrat this morning. Exactly the company you've been secretly positioning to acquire. Only 3 people knew about that plan. You, your CFO, and Daniel." The betrayal deepened, spreading like poison through Christopher's veins. It wasn't enough that Daniel had taken his wife. Now he was moving against his business too. "I'll bury him," Christopher said quietly, and Eleanor smiled for the first time. "There's my son. Now, shall we discuss strategy?" As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Christopher stood at his window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere out there, Natasha and Daniel were probably together, planning their future with his child. No, not his child. Never his child. The thought should have destroyed him, but instead something cold and hard crystallized in his chest. "Richard," he called his lawyer. "Cancel the generous settlement. We're fighting this with everything we have." Richard's relief was audible. "Thank God you've come to your senses. I'll file the papers citing the infidelity clause immediately." But Christopher wasn't finished. "And call Marcus Chen at Chen Industries. Tell him I have a proposition regarding Whitmore Industries. If Daniel wants to play corporate warfare, he's about to learn why I've never lost a hostile takeover." The night stretched ahead, full of possibility and pain. Christopher poured himself another bourbon, but this time he sipped it slowly, thoughtfully. The anniversary gift still sat on the counter, its diamonds winking in the ambient lighting. On impulse, he picked it up and walked to the terrace. The city spread below him like a glittering circuit board, each light representing dreams and ambitions and betrayals. He held the necklace over the edge, watching it swing in the evening breeze. $2 million hanging by his fingertips. In another life, it would have adorned Natasha's neck at dinner tonight. They would have smiled for photographers, played the perfect power couple, gone home to their separate bedrooms and separate lives. Perhaps Daniel had done him a favor in the cruelest possible way. Christopher's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, his blood froze. It was an ultrasound image, clearly showing a developing fetus. The message read, "Your nephew or niece. I thought you should see." The audacity of it, the casual cruelty, made Christopher's decision for him. He let the necklace fall, watching it disappear into the darkness below, a $2 million sacrifice to the gods of vengeance. Christopher just threw away a $2 million necklace in a moment of rage and symbolism. Was this an act of liberation or waste? When we're hurt, do grand gestures help us heal, or do they simply mask deeper pain? Share your thoughts on how we process betrayal. Mr. Rothschild. The doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. "The police are here. Something about jewelry falling from your terrace?" Christopher almost laughed. Of course someone had seen. In Manhattan, someone always saw everything. "Send them up," he said, already preparing his story about a tragic accident, a clasp that failed, a devastating loss on an already devastating day. The officers were professionally sympathetic, taking his statement about the accidental loss, while trying not to stare at the obvious wealth surrounding them. After they left, Christopher sat in his study, pulling up financial documents on his computer. If Daniel thought he knew all of Christopher's secrets, he was wrong. There were shell companies even his partners didn't know about, resources hidden for exactly this kind of war. His phone rang again. This time, it was his CFO, Marcus Thompson. "Chris, I've been trying to reach you all day. The board is in panic mode. We need you at the emergency meeting tomorrow morning." Christopher considered refusing, then realized that hiding would only make him look weak. "I'll be there," he said. "And Marcus? Start quietly liquidating our positions in anything connected to Daniel's portfolio. Full divestment within 30 days. That's hundreds of millions in potential losses," Marcus said carefully. "Are you sure?" Christopher's smile was cold. "I've never been more sure of anything. And Marcus, find out everything you can about Whitmore Industries' debt structure. I have a feeling they're more leveraged than they appear." Catherine returned as Christopher was deep in spreadsheets, bringing Chinese takeout and a disapproving look. "You need to eat," she said, unpacking containers, "and you need to sleep. You can't wage war on an empty stomach and no rest." But Christopher was energized now, focused in a way he hadn't been in years. "Did you know," he asked suddenly, "about Natasha and Daniel?" Catherine paused, chopsticks halfway to her mouth. "I suspected," she admitted. The way she looked at him, the way she lit up when he entered a room. "But I hoped I was wrong." Christopher nodded slowly. "Everyone knew but me. The brilliant businessman, the master strategist, and I couldn't see what was happening in my own home." "You saw what you wanted to see," Catherine said gently. "We all do. The question now is what you're going to do about it." Christopher turned his laptop toward her, showing a complex web of financial projections. "I'm going to destroy Daniel Winters. Professionally, financially, completely. And then I'm going to rebuild my life without either of them in it. The next morning, Christopher entered the Rothschild Capital boardroom like a general entering battle. He'd slept 3 hours, but his Armani suit was immaculate, his expression calm. The board members were already assembled, their faces ranging from sympathetic to calculating. Harrison Blake, the lead independent director, cleared his throat. Christopher, given the recent personal developments and their impact on the company's stock price, we need to discuss leadership stability. Christopher smiled coldly. Gentlemen, ladies, my personal life has indeed taken an unexpected turn, but let me be clear. My ability to lead this company and generate returns for our shareholders remains unchanged. In fact, I'm about to announce an acquisition that will increase our portfolio value by 30%. The room stirred with interest. What acquisition? Harrison asked. Christopher pulled up his presentation. Textrat Industries. I've been positioning for this for 6 months. The deal will close within the week. Someone coughed. But Whitmore Industries announced their bid yesterday. Whitmore doesn't have the capital, Christopher said smoothly. Their debt-to-equity ratio is unsustainable. I've already spoken with their primary lenders. They're very interested in my offer to buy their debt at a premium. The implications were clear. Christopher would own Whitmore's debt, giving him leverage over the company Daniel was working with. This seems like a very aggressive move, board member Jennifer Walsh observed. Some might say it's personally motivated. Christopher met her gaze steadily. Everything in business is personal, Jennifer. The question is whether it's also profitable. This deal will net us minimum $500 million in the first year. If that happens to disadvantage someone who betrayed my trust, consider it a bonus. The vote was unanimous. The board might have concerns about Christopher's personal life, but they couldn't argue with his financial acumen. As the meeting adjourned, Harrison pulled Christopher aside. Be careful, Chris. Revenge has a way of consuming the avenger. Christopher straightened his tie. Then it's a good thing I have such a large appetite. The financial press went wild with the announcement. Rothschild strikes back, screamed the Wall Street Journal. The stock price recovered half its losses as investors bet on Christopher's proven ability to execute complex deals. But the real victory came when Christopher's phone rang that afternoon. You son of a bitch. Daniel's voice was strained. You're trying to destroy Whitmore just to get at me? Christopher leaned back in his chair, feet up on his desk. Daniel, I'm hurt. This is just business. You, of all people, should understand that. After all, you were just conducting business when you slept with my wife, weren't you? This is different, and you know it. Hundreds of people work at Whitmore. You're going to destroy their lives for your petty revenge. Christopher's laugh was without humor. Petty? You impregnated my wife, and you call my response petty? Besides, I'm not destroying Whitmore. I'm acquiring it. The employees will be fine. You, on the other hand, might want to update your resume. Natasha won't forgive you for this, Daniel said desperately. She still cares about you, Chris. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The audacity of the statement made Christopher's grip tighten on his phone. Natasha's forgiveness stopped mattering the moment she chose you. Give her my regards. And do let me know if it's a boy or a girl. I'll send an appropriate gift. Perhaps a calculator, so the child can count exactly how much their father's betrayal cost. After hanging up, Christopher sat in the gathering darkness of his office, feeling simultaneously victorious and empty. The game was in motion now, pieces moving across the board with inevitable precision. But as he looked out at the city lights, he wondered what victory would actually look like. Would destroying Daniel bring Natasha back? Would it ease the ache in his chest? Would it make him whole again? His phone buzzed with a text from Natasha. Please, can we talk? Not about us, but about the future. We're going to be in each other's lives, whether we want to be or not. Manhattan isn't that big. Christopher stared at the message for a long time before typing back. There is no us to discuss. Your lawyer can communicate with mine. As for Manhattan not being big enough, you're right. I suggest you consider relocating. But even as he sent the cold response, Christopher found himself pulling up old photos on his phone. Their trip to Santorini, where Natasha had worn that white sundress that made her look like a Greek goddess. Their 5th anniversary in Tokyo, when she tried to use chopsticks and ended up laughing so hard she cried. When had the laughter stopped? When had they become strangers sharing expensive real estate? The penthouse felt oppressively empty when he returned that night. Christopher walked through the rooms, seeing ghosts everywhere. Natasha's reading chair by the window, where she'd curl up with her mysteries. The kitchen, where she'd attempted to cook exactly once, setting off the smoke alarms and ordering sushi instead. The bedroom they'd shared until 2 years ago, when she'd quietly moved to the guest suite, claiming his snoring disturbed her sleep. He'd accepted it then, too focused on a merger to question why his snoring had suddenly become intolerable after 8 years. Now he wondered if that was when it started with Daniel. Had his best friend been in his bed while he was conquering boardrooms? The thought made him sick, and he found himself in the bathroom, dry, heaving over the pristine toilet. When his stomach settled, Christopher looked at himself in the mirror. 45 years old, worth $12 billion and completely, utterly alone. The reflection that stared back looked haggard, hollow, like success had eaten him from the inside out. "You did this to yourself," he told his reflection. "You chose the Empire over the Empress." His phone rang. Catherine again. "Have you eaten?" she asked without preamble. "I'm not hungry," Christopher replied. "I don't care. I'm sending food. Roberto's, your favorite? And before you protest, remember that even Napoleon had to eat between battles." The food arrived 30 minutes later, and despite himself, Christopher found comfort in the familiar flavors of the Italian restaurant he'd frequented since his 20s. As he ate alone at his massive dining table, Christopher's phone buzzed with news alerts. The story had gone international now, with business channels from London to Tokyo discussing the scandal. His name was trending on social media, with thousands of strangers weighing in on his marriage, his friendship, his failure. The court of public opinion was divided. Some saw him as a victim, others as a cold workaholic who'd driven his wife away. One comment struck him particularly. Maybe if he'd spent as much on time as he did on diamonds, she wouldn't have left. Christopher wanted to argue, to point out all the vacations, the gestures, the efforts he'd made. But hadn't they all been scheduled between deals, squeezed into his calendar like obligatory maintenance? When was the last time he'd spontaneously surprised Natasha with anything that didn't come with a price tag? Unable to sleep, Christopher found himself in his study at 3 a.m., not working on financial documents but writing. He didn't know why. But he needed to document this, to make sense of the chaos through words. "Day 1 after death," he typed. Because that's what this is. The death of the life I thought I had, the future I'd planned, the man I believed myself to be. The words poured out, raw and honest, in a way he'd never allowed himself to be. He wrote about meeting Natasha at a charity gala, how she'd challenged him intellectually in a way no one else dared. He wrote about Daniel, the friend who'd stood by him through every crisis until he became the crisis. He wrote about the baby that would carry Daniel's DNA, but would always be a reminder of Christopher's inadequacy. By dawn, he'd written 20 pages, a manifesto of pain and self-recrimination. On impulse, he emailed it to Catherine with the subject line, "In case I don't survive this intact." Her response was immediate, despite the early hour. "You will survive. You're a Rothschild. We're genetically incapable of giving up. Also, your writing is terrible. Stick to spreadsheets." The small moment of levity helped, and Christopher managed to shower and dress for another day of warfare. But as he knotted his tie, his hands trembled slightly. The armor of expensive clothing couldn't quite hide the wounded man beneath. Today he would meet with Whitmore's creditors, would tighten the noose around Daniel's professional neck. But what then? What came after victory, if victory left you with nothing but money and memories? As Christopher prepares for his revenge while grappling with profound loneliness, we see the cost of prioritizing vengeance over healing. If you were in his position, would you focus on destroying those who betrayed you? Or would you channel that energy into rebuilding yourself? What path leads to true recovery? Share your experiences and wisdom below. The meeting with Whitmore's creditors was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the St. Regis Hotel's private conference room. Christopher arrived early, reviewing his strategy while nursing a black coffee that did little to ease the exhaustion weighing on him. He'd assembled a team of the city's most ruthless financial attorneys, each one eager to prove their worth in what was already being called the deal of the decade. When the creditors filed in, representatives from 3 major banks and 2 hedge funds, Christopher stood to greet them with his practiced smile, the one that had closed 1,000 deals. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for coming. I believe we have a mutually beneficial opportunity to discuss the lead banker, Harold Morrison from Chase. Cut straight to the point. Mr. Rothschild, Whitmore Industries is current on all their payments. Why should we consider selling their debt to you? Christopher pulled up his presentation, showing Whitmore's deteriorating fundamentals that the public reports had carefully hidden. Because in 6 months, they won't be current. Their cash flow is unsustainable, their expansion plans are over-leveraged, and their newest partner, he paused for effect, has a history of extracting value before abandoning sinking ships. I'm offering you 90 cents on the dollar today for debt that will be worth 60 cents in 6 months. The room stirred with interest and concern. Harold leaned forward. And what do you plan to do with this debt, Mr. Rothschild? Christopher's smile turned predatory. What I always do, Harold. Create value for my stakeholders. Whitmore can be saved, but not with its current leadership structure. I'm offering you a graceful exit from a deteriorating situation. The question is whether you're smart enough to take it. 3 hours later, Christopher walked out with agreements in principle from all 5 creditors. Within a week, he would control $600 million in Whitmore debt, giving him effective control over the company's future. His phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. This won't bring her back. Christopher deleted it without responding. Daniel still didn't understand. This wasn't about winning Natasha back. This was about proving that betrayal had consequences. That evening, Christopher attended a charity gala he couldn't avoid. The Children's Hospital annual fundraiser, where Rothschild Capital was a platinum sponsor. He knew Natasha would be there, she was on the organizing committee. He'd considered skipping it, but that would look like weakness. Instead, he arrived in his new Bentley, alone but impeccably dressed, ready to face the social guillotine. The ballroom fell silent when he entered, hundreds of eyes tracking his movement through the space. Christopher kept his expression neutral, accepting condolences with grace and deflecting questions with practiced ease. Then he saw them, Natasha and Daniel, standing together near the auction displays. Natasha wore a navy gown that did little to hide her growing bump, while Daniel kept a protective hand on her lower back. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, time stopped. Natasha looked beautiful and miserable in equal measure, dark circles under her eyes that expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. She took a step toward him, but Christopher turned away, engaging the nearest person in conversation about anything at all, to avoid the confrontation that would shatter his carefully maintained composure. Christopher Rothschild, as I live and breathe, a familiar voice drawled behind him. He turned to find Veronika Volkov, the Russian tech heiress he'd dated briefly before meeting Natasha. She looked stunning in an emerald dress that matched her eyes, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I heard about your little domestic situation. How terribly mundane for someone of your caliber. Veronika, Christopher acknowledged, accepting the air kisses that passed for greeting in their circle. I didn't know you were in New York. She linked her arm through his, a possessive gesture that wouldn't go unnoticed. I flew in when I heard you were suddenly single. Thought you might need some distraction. Her voice carried perfectly to where Natasha and Daniel stood, and Christopher saw his soon-to-be ex-wife's jaw tighten. How thoughtful, Christopher said, playing along because it was easier than feeling. Would you like champagne? As he led Veronika toward the bar, he caught a glimpse of Natasha pulling Daniel toward the exit. Good. Let her feel a fraction of what he'd felt seeing them together. Let her wonder if Veronika had been waiting in the wings the way Daniel had. But the victory felt hollow when Veronika leaned in close and whispered, She's watching us from the terrace. Shall we give her a show? Christopher looked down at this beautiful, calculating woman and felt nothing. No games, Veronika. I'm not that man anymore. She studied him with those predator eyes. No, you're not. You're something more dangerous now. You're a man with nothing left to lose. The auction began, and Christopher bid aggressively on everything, dropping $250,000 on items he didn't want, just to demonstrate that his wealth remained intact. But when Natasha's donated item came up, a week at their Hamptons house, with all proceeds going to the children's ward, Christopher felt his chest constrict. She was auctioning off their memories, their private sanctuary. $500,000 he bid before he could stop himself. The room gasped at the astronomical opening bid for a house rental. The auctioneer stammered. $500,000 going once, $600,000. Daniel's voice rang out from near the terrace. The crowd turned between them like spectators at a tennis match, sensing blood in the water. 1 million, Christopher said calmly, though his hand clenched around his champagne flute so tightly it was a miracle it didn't shatter. It's for charity, after all. Daniel started to raise his paddle again, but Natasha grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. After a tense moment, Daniel lowered his paddle, and Christopher won the auction for a week in a house he already owned half of. A house where he'd made love to his wife, where they'd talked about children, where his life had been complete. After the gala, Christopher found himself walking the streets of Manhattan despite his driver's protests. He needed to move, to feel something other than the numbing rage that had sustained him through the evening. His phone rang, Catherine calling to check in, but he let it go to voicemail. He couldn't handle her sympathy right now, couldn't bear anyone's kindness when he felt so fundamentally broken. He ended up at the small park where he'd proposed to Natasha 11 years ago. The bench was still there, though the tree they'd carved their initials into had been removed due to disease. How fitting. Christopher sat on the cold bench, remembering how confident he'd been that night, how certain that Natasha was his destiny. Now, destiny felt like a cosmic joke, and he was the punchline. A homeless man approached, asking for spare change. Christopher pulled out his wallet and handed over everything in it, about $800. The man's eyes widened. You sure, mister? Christopher laughed bitterly. Money's never been my problem, friend. It's everything else I can't seem to purchase. The man pocketed the cash quickly. Can't buy love, that's for sure. But it can buy a hell of a lot of forgetting. Christopher returned to his penthouse at 3 a.m. to find someone waiting in his private lobby. Not Natasha or Daniel, but Michael Chen, his CFO. We have a problem, Michael said without preamble. Daniel's been reaching out to our key clients, suggesting that your personal situation makes you unstable. Goldman's considering pulling their investment. The betrayal deepened. It wasn't enough that Daniel had taken his wife. Now he was actively trying to destroy his business. Set up a meeting with Goldman for tomorrow, Christopher said coldly. And Michael? Start the hostile takeover of Whitmore immediately. No more playing nice. I want that company gutted and sold for parts within 30 days. That's aggressive, Michael said carefully. The board might have concerns about the optics. Christopher fixed him with a stare that had made grown men quit on the spot. The board can either back me or find themselves replaced. I built this company from nothing. I'll burn it to the ground before I let him take it from me too. After Michael left, Christopher stood in his empty penthouse, surrounded by millions of dollars of art and furniture that meant nothing. He picked up a Waterford crystal vase, a wedding gift from Natasha's parents, and hurled it against the wall, watching it explode into thousands of glittering pieces. Then another and another, until the floor was covered in expensive debris and his hands were bleeding from minor cuts. The destruction felt good, cathartic, but when he stopped, breathing heavily amid the ruins, nothing had changed. Natasha was still pregnant with Daniel's child. His best friend had still betrayed him. His life was still shattered. Only now his penthouse matched his internal state. He laughed at the absurdity of it all. Christopher Rothschild, master of the universe, standing in his boxer shorts and t-shirt, bleeding onto Persian rugs while crystal crunched under his bare feet. The cleaning service arrived at 6 a.m., as they always did, and if they were surprised by the destruction, they didn't show it. Christopher watched them work, efficiently erasing the evidence of his breakdown, and wondered if they could clean up the rest of his life as easily. Sir, you're bleeding, one of them said softly, a young woman who reminded him painfully of Natasha at that age. It's nothing, he said, but she insisted on bandaging his hands with supplies from the kitchen first aid kit. Her kindness almost undid him, this stranger showing more care than the people he'd trusted most. Thank you, he managed, pressing $100 tip into her hand. She tried to refuse, but he insisted. Please, it's the only kind of gratitude I know how to express anymore. The Goldman meeting was a massacre. Christopher walked in with financial projections that demonstrated not just stability but aggressive growth. Then calmly explained how Daniel's attempts to poach clients violated his non-compete agreement and opened him to litigation that would bankrupt him personally. Gentlemen, Christopher concluded, you can side with a man whose greatest achievement is stealing another man's wife. Or you can side with a man who's made you $7 billion over the last 5 years. Your choice. Goldman not only retained their investment but increased it by 50%. Word spread quickly through the financial community. Christopher Rothschild was wounded but not weak, and anyone who tried to exploit his personal situation would face professional annihilation. By market close, 3 more major firms had explicitly affirmed their support, and Daniel's reputation as a dealmaker was in tatters. That evening, Christopher received an unexpected visitor. Natasha's mother, Margaret. She'd always been fond of him, had once told him he was the son she'd never had. Now she stood in his penthouse, her expression unreadable. "May I come in?" she asked formally, as if they were strangers. "Of course, Margaret. You're always welcome here." The lie came easily, though they both knew everything had changed. She settled onto the sofa, looking older than her 68 years. "I came to apologize," she said simply. "For Natasha, for this situation, for my failure as a mother to raise a daughter who understood the value of loyalty." "You have nothing to apologize for," Christopher said, though part of him was grateful someone from Natasha's side acknowledged the wrong. "You didn't make her choices?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I knew about Daniel. Suspected anyway. The way she talked about him. The way she glowed when his name came up. I should have said something. Should have reminded her of her vows." They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people connected by a relationship that was dissolving. Finally, Margaret stood to leave, but paused at the door. "She does love you, you know. In her way. She just loved herself more after she left." Christopher pondered those words. Was that true? Or had Natasha simply never loved him at all, just the idea of him, the lifestyle he provided? His phone buzzed with an email from his lawyer. Natasha's team had responded to his filing. She was contesting the prenup's infidelity clause, claiming emotional abandonment and neglect as contributing factors. She wanted half of everything plus child support, despite the child not being his. The audacity of it made Christopher laugh, a dark sound that echoed through the penthouse. He called Richard immediately. "She wants to play dirty? Fine. Subpoena her phone records, her emails, everything. I want to know every communication she's had with Daniel for the last year. And, Richard, hire a forensic accountant. I want to know if any of my money has already made its way to Daniel's accounts." Richard hesitated. "That's going to get very ugly, very public." "Good," Christopher said. "Let the world see exactly who Natasha Rothschild really is. Let them see what kind of man Daniel Winters is. They wanted to destroy me, quietly, privately. But if I'm going to burn, everyone's going to see the flames." The next morning brought a new crisis. Christopher arrived at his office to find security dealing with an intruder, Daniel, desperate and disheveled, demanding to see him. "Let him up," Christopher told security, curious what his former friend wanted. Daniel entered the office like a beaten dog, all his usual confidence gone. "You're destroying me," Daniel said without preamble. "Whitmore's board fired me. My investors are pulling out. My reputation is ruined." Christopher leaned back in his chair, unmoved. "And?" Daniel's face flushed with anger. "And? That's all you have to say? 23 years of friendship and you're destroying my life over a woman." "You destroyed our friendship when you slept with my wife," Christopher said calmly. "You destroyed your own life when you thought you could take what was mine without consequences. The woman, as you so eloquently put it, is carrying your child. My wife is having your baby. So forgive me if I don't weep for your suffering." Daniel slumped into a chair, uninvited. "She came to me, Chris. She was lonely, desperate for attention. What was I supposed to do?" Christopher stood, his calm finally cracking. "You were supposed to be my friend. You were supposed to tell me my marriage was in trouble, not exploit it for your own satisfaction. You were supposed to have my back, not stab me in it." "I fell in love," Daniel said weakly. "Can you understand that? I didn't mean to, but I fell in love with her." Christopher walked to his window, looking out at the city he'd conquered. "I understand perfectly. You fell in love with my wife, in my life, with everything I'd built. Did you ever love her, Daniel, or did you love taking her from me?" The question hung in the air, and Daniel's silence was answer enough. Finally, he stood to leave. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end like this. Christopher didn't turn around. It ended the moment you touched her. Everything else is just aftermath. After Daniel left, Christopher sat at his desk, feeling strangely empty. The confrontation he'd imagined so many times had come and gone, leaving nothing resolved. Catherine arrived for lunch, bringing sushi from his favorite place and her trademark brutal honesty. "You look terrible," she announced. "When did you last eat a real meal?" Christopher couldn't remember. Food had become functional, something he consumed when his body absolutely demanded it. "I'm fine," he said automatically. "You're not fine. You're on a revenge rampage that's consuming you. Yes, they betrayed you. Yes, it hurts. But destroying Daniel won't bring Natasha back. It won't undo the pregnancy. It won't fill the hole in your chest." She set down the sushi and grasped his hands. "Chris, you need to stop this before you become someone you don't recognize." "I already don't recognize myself," Christopher admitted. "I look in the mirror and see a stranger. The man who built this empire, who married Natasha, who called Daniel brother. He's gone. I don't know who's left." Catherine squeezed his hands tighter. "The man who's left is my brother, and he's stronger than he knows. But strength isn't just about destruction. Sometimes it's about choosing to rebuild." That afternoon, Christopher did something unexpected. He went to therapy. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison came highly recommended, specializing in high-profile clients dealing with betrayal and loss. Her office was discreet, comfortable without being ostentatious. "Mr. Rothschild," she began, "tell me why you're here." "Because my sister will kill me if I don't try," Christopher said. Then more honestly, "Because I'm afraid of who I'm becoming. I've always been controlled, calculated. Now I feel like I'm drowning in rage, and I don't know how to surface." Dr. Morrison nodded. "Betrayal trauma is particularly difficult for people who value control. Your entire worldview has been shattered. The question is, do you want to rebuild the same world or create something new?" The session was brutal, forcing Christopher to confront truths he'd been avoiding. His workaholism hadn't started after the betrayal, it had contributed to it. His emotional unavailability hadn't been noble sacrifice for success. It had been cowardice, an unwillingness to be vulnerable. By the end, he felt flayed raw, but also strangely lighter. "I want you to try something," Dr. Morrison said as the session ended. "Write a letter to Natasha. Not to send, just to express everything you're feeling. No filters, no careful word choices, just truth." Christopher agreed, though the thought of putting his pain into words felt like volunteering for torture. He returned to his penthouse to find a package waiting, the pregnancy announcement cards Natasha had ordered before everything fell apart. Elegant cream cardstock with gold lettering, the Rothschilds are pleased to announce. The cruel irony of it made him sink to the floor, holding the cards that announced a future that would never exist. That night, he wrote the letter Dr. Morrison had suggested. It started controlled, but quickly devolved into raw pain. "Dear Natasha, I hate you. I love you. I miss the woman I thought you were. I mourn the children we'll never have. I rage at the child you're having with him. I wonder if you ever loved me at all, or if I was just the best option available at the time." The letter went on for pages, years of suppressed emotions pouring out. When he finished, Christopher felt exhausted but clearer. He understood now that his marriage had been dying long before Daniel entered the picture. The betrayal was just the final symptom of a disease that had been growing for years. His phone rang at midnight, an unknown number. When he answered, a woman's voice said, "Mr. Rothschild, this is Mount Sinai Hospital. Your wife has been admitted. She's asking for you." Christopher's heart stopped. Is the baby?" "She's stable," the nurse assured him. "But she's very distressed and insists on seeing you." Every instinct told him not to go, but Christopher found himself in his car, being driven through the empty streets toward the hospital. Whatever Natasha had done, she was still technically his wife. And despite everything, he couldn't ignore her in a medical crisis. The man he'd been before would have stayed away, protected himself. But that man had already lost everything worth protecting. The hospital was quiet at this hour, all fluorescent lights and sanitized suffering. Christopher found Natasha in a private room, hooked to monitors, her face pale and tear-streaked. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. You came, she whispered, reaching for his hand. He didn't take it. What happened? He asked clinically. Natasha's eyes filled with fresh tears. Complications. They said the stress. The baby might. She broke down completely, and despite himself, Christopher felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever else she was a woman terrified of losing her child. Where's Daniel? He asked, and her tears intensified. He left. When the lawyers started demanding financial records, when his deals started falling apart, he said he needed space to think. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Daniel had abandoned her the moment things got difficult, just as she'd abandoned Christopher. I'm sorry, Natasha said suddenly. Not just for this, for everything. For not being brave enough to tell you I was unhappy. For not fighting for our marriage before running to someone else. For letting you find out the way you did. Christopher sat in the visitor's chair, maintaining distance. Are you sorry for the affair, or sorry you got caught? Natasha was quiet for a long moment. Both, she admitted. I'm sorry for hurting you, but I'm not sorry for feeling alive again, even if it was wrong. It was the most honest thing she'd said to him in years. The baby, Christopher said carefully. It's not responsible for any of this. Whatever happens between us, the child is innocent. I know you hate me, Natasha said, but could you stay? Just until I know the baby's okay. I don't want to be alone. Christopher wanted to leave, to let her experience the isolation she'd condemned him to. But looking at her, frightened and abandoned by the man she'd chosen over him, he found a tiny spark of compassion. I'll stay, he said, but not for you. For the child who didn't choose any of this. They sat in silence as the monitors beeped. Two people who had once promised forever, now strangers bound only by legal documents and shared history. After an hour, the doctor came in with good news. The baby was fine, but Natasha needed rest and reduced stress. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Christopher stood to leave. Thank you, Natasha said softly, for coming, for staying. You didn't have to. He paused at the door. I did have to. Because unlike you and Daniel, I honor my commitments, even when they're to people who don't deserve it. The words were harsh, but there was no venom in them anymore, just exhausted truth. As he walked through the hospital corridors, Christopher realized something had shifted. The rage was still there, but it no longer consumed him. Natasha's betrayal, Daniel's treachery, they were facts now, not open wounds. His phone had exploded with messages while he'd been at the hospital. The media had gotten wind of Natasha's hospitalization and his presence there. Rothschild reconciliation? Speculated the headlines. Christopher ignored them all, going home to shower and change for another day of meetings. But when he looked in the mirror this time, he didn't see a stranger. He saw a man who had been broken and was slowly, painfully putting himself back together. Not the same as before. That man was gone forever. But perhaps someone better. Someone who had learned that success without connection was meaningless, that wealth without warmth was poverty. The divorce papers were waiting on his desk when he arrived at the office, delivered by Natasha's lawyer personally. She was willing to accept a settlement of $1 billion, no alimony, no claim to the company. It was far less than she could have demanded. A note was attached in her handwriting. I took enough from you already. Christopher signed without hesitation, feeling another chain break. The marriage was over officially now, or would be once a judge approved. 10 years reduced to signatures and asset division. But as he handed the papers back to the lawyer, Christopher felt lighter. The end of one chapter meant the beginning of another. Michael Chen knocked and entered. The Whitmore acquisition is complete. We now own the company outright. What do you want to do with it? Christopher considered. His original plan had been to destroy it, to salt the earth so Daniel could never return. But now, that seemed petty, wasteful. Keep the profitable divisions, sell the rest. Offer jobs to any Whitmore employees who want them. They didn't choose their leadership. Michael looked surprised. That's very generous, Christopher shrugged. It's practical. Good talent is hard to find, and they've already been punished enough for Daniel's choices. As Michael left, Christopher turned to his computer and began working on something new. Not another acquisition or hostile takeover, but a business plan for a different kind of company. One focused, not just on profit, but on purpose. The betrayal had taught him that money without meaning was empty. Perhaps it was time to build something that mattered. His phone rang. Dr. Morrison calling to schedule their next appointment. "How are you feeling after our session?" she asked. Christopher considered lying, giving the expected answer, but chose honesty instead. "Like I'm learning to breathe underwater. It's not comfortable, but I'm not drowning anymore." "That's progress," she said warmly. "Recovery isn't linear, Mr. Rothschild. There will be setbacks. But you're doing the work, and that's what matters." After scheduling the appointment, Christopher sat back in his chair, looking out at the city that had been his entire world for so long. Somewhere out there, Natasha was preparing for motherhood with a man who'd already shown his true colors. Daniel was trying to salvage his career from the wreckage Christopher had created. And Christopher himself. He was sitting in his tower, surrounded by success, finally understanding that winning and healing were not the same thing. The sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, the same colors as that morning 10 years ago when he'd married Natasha. But instead of endings, Christopher found himself thinking about beginnings. The beginning of honesty with himself. The beginning of a life not measured in acquisitions, but in connections. The beginning of becoming the man he should have been all along. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Dinner tonight. And before you say you're busy, remember that I know where you live, and I'm not above breaking in." Christopher smiled, the expression feeling foreign but welcome on his face. "Your place or mine?" he typed back. "Mine. Someone needs to teach you that there's more to food than protein shakes and whatever your assistant orders." For the first time in weeks, Christopher left the office before midnight, choosing family over the endless pursuit of more. It was a small step, but it was a step away from the man who had lost everything and toward the man who might, just might, find something worth keeping. As his driver navigated through the evening traffic, Christopher didn't check his phone, didn't review contracts, didn't strategize his next move. He simply sat and watched the city pass by, all its millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. His story was just one among them, neither more nor less important than any other. The realization should have been humbling, perhaps even depressing. Instead, it was liberating. Christopher Rothschild, billionaire, had lost everything that mattered. But Christopher Rothschild, human being, was just beginning to discover what that meant. And for the first time since finding Natasha in another man's arms, that felt like enough to build a future on. That's it for today, family. Tell me, what lesson did you learn from this story? I'd like to know in the comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your post notification as we share stories like this every week. Until next time, stay blessed.